Asteroid of fear.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Men of the House podcast. And today we have Duncan Brown. And I'm not even going to attempt to say his middle name. I'll let him say that for you. But it's a quite departure from the first names I mentioned. And today we're going to talk about alcohol. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm approaching a year of not drinking alcohol. So this is a topic that's kind of near and dear to me. I hope you guys will get something out of it. How you doing today, Duncan?
I'm good. I'm good. And congratulations on approaching a year. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's pronounce that middle name for the
Oh, yeah.
listeners.
So my name is Duncan Bhaskaran Brown, which is, yeah, like you say, a bit incongruous. It's a bit of an odd combination. Duncan Brown is obviously my name, and then the Bhaskaran bit comes from my wife, who is British Indian. So it's from South India, from Kerala.
Oh, cool. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. Your specialty and kind of what you love to discuss is around alcohol and quitting alcohol. And so let's just give the audience a little bit about your background and kind of how you arrived here. And then we'll get into talking about why alcohol is an epidemic and what it does for productivity and some of the other questions I mentioned before we started recording.
Cool. So, well, basically, I was stood in front of an empty warehouse, and this warehouse was full of flashing lights and sweating bodies and loud, loud music. And I wanted to go inside because I knew inside was going to be the party of the year. But I didn't want to go inside because I was quite nervous. I was quite scared. I did not entirely know what to do until one of my friends handed me a can of beer. And I have to admit, I wasn't that taken with the taste. But I drank it anyway because you've got to look cool at such events, haven't you? And maybe when I got about halfway through the second one, I started to feel this kind of tingling in my toes, like was moving up through my legs, all the way up. Finally, made it up to my head, and all of a sudden, I had the confidence to walk through the door. No, dear listener, I strutted through that door, and I was cutting the light fantastic all night. It went so well. I even went home with that wonderful girl from Form F. So, that was one of my first experiences with alcohol, and it seemed to solve all of my problems in life. I thought all of my Christmases had come at once. It made me confident. It made me relaxed. It made me funny. It made me better looking. At least that's what I thought. Like I say, it seemed to just fill in the holes in my personality. And I thought, this is amazing stuff. I have got to drink me an awful lot of this. So I did.
That's how it usually goes, right?
Yeah,
How did you feel
yeah.
the next day? Most people, I can't remember if drinking the first time I had a hangover but there has to be a point that you're like, well, the juice was worth the squeeze. The hangover's not terrible enough for me to not go down this road again. Like you said, you wanted to, like any addict of any sort, you're chasing that first feeling of confidence of, ooh, I just got what I need. This is what I've been missing my whole life.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a good analogy would be an action film, isn't it? After the curtain goes down on the action film, the next day when the hero wakes up covered in cuts and bruises, he's going to be feeling bad about it, isn't he? And likewise, I felt terrible the next day. I felt genuinely awful. I think I was even sick, but I'd kissed the girl, and in my opinion, I'd saved the Nakatomi Plaza. So it was all good. It was like, yeah, definitely, the juice was worth the squeeze.
So at what point do you realize that you're gonna kind of switch lanes or do a complete 180 and go the opposite direction? And, when did you notice that alcohol became a problem for you? And what made you decide to kind of nip it in the bud and say, I just can't do this? Or did you hit a rock bottom? Or was it just kind of you were in tune enough to know that you were getting your mojo and you didn't need it?
Yeah, so I'd love to say I was really in tune, but that's the one thing that I definitely was not. So, I mean, the thing is, it happened gradually, didn't it? Because, it started off, it was all good fun. It was all social drinking. I wasn't drinking that much, and I was always drinking with lots of people. But as the years went on, the amount of people I was drinking with went down, and the amount I was drinking went up, until I ended up sat in my flat on my own drinking a couple of bottles of wine a night. And it's just, yeah, I guess I probably should have noticed that that was a problem, but I think I only really realized what a problem it was after I'd stopped. In terms of stopping, I think I kind of got lucky, because I somehow managed to keep hold of my job, and I'd even managed to keep hold of a very, very amazing woman who even managed to marry her, which still, comes as a bit of a surprise, I suppose. And we did, because we got married, we thought we'd do the adult thing, because we were now for grown-ups. We were married, we had a place, all of that sort of stuff. So we thought we'd start a family, and that was quite good fun. Well, I mean, the trying bit was quite good fun, wasn't it? And yeah, it was like we were that typical, like picture that utterly naive, stupid, optimistic couple. That was exactly us, until we, went into that scanning room, and that nurse told us that my wife was having a miscarriage. And then it went quite bad quite quickly. And, of course, that was it was really difficult for my wife, a tremendous emotional, physical, mental burden for her. But what made it worse was I wasn't there for her. My response to stress, to difficult times, to hard emotions, it was always just to go and pour myself into a bottle of something. So that's exactly what I did. I basically abandoned her and got drunk. I mean, yeah, physically I was present, but I
Right.
wasn't really present. And things got very difficult, and it sort of came to a head. And I realized, looking back on it now, what I was doing was I was basically asking myself a question. What do I want from life? What am I here for? What is the purpose of me? And I never, would have been able to articulate it quite so clearly at the time. But now I know that what I was asking myself was, do I want another drink, or do I want to start a family? And the good news is I did make the right decision. And almost 9 months to the day after I stopped drinking, our daughter Leela was born. And that was fantastic for about 10 minutes. And then you realize you've got a whole other world of problems. But I mean, they're good problems, aren't they? So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's wild. And mine was very similar in that I had like a little break when it was before my wife's birthday in August, and I decided to stop drinking. My daughter was born in November, and I made it a little over 2 years, I think, and 1/4 of July kind of went back. And then you're kind of in, that pattern of you have a few, sometimes it's a problem, you quit for months or weeks or whatever, and then you go back, and then I just think at some point I was like you said, you're asking yourself that question, like, well, what is it I want? What do I want to do? And once I realized what it kind of was doing to my brain, and I could notice the depression much sooner impacting me after a drink. And on my birthday last year, I had 2 margaritas. It was probably within an hour and a half. I could already feel myself kind of coming down, depression setting in. And I just said, I'm not going to do it anymore, because I didn't like the depression, the mental feeling. But anyone who's
No,
listening,
and
if you
I
think you
think,
can have it, don't. If you make 2 years, don't try.
yeah, and I think you kind of raise a really interesting point. I don't think people are really as aware of as they should be. So, serotonin is such an important neurotransmitter.
Mhm.
It's connected with a lot of really important things like empathy, but its absence is also connected with depression, which is why when you get medication for depression, it acts on your serotonin system. So there are people out there who are taking antidepressants, and then they go and drink alcohol, which also acts on your serotonin system, but in completely the other direction. So it's fair to say alcohol is a pro-depressant. So they're taking antidepressants, and then they're drinking pro-depressants, and then they're wondering why their medication doesn't work, and why their life isn't getting any better. And I think that's one of the big mistakes that the medical industry makes, is that they put avoid drinking, and people go, oh yeah, well, I avoid drinking, it follows me round. And it's like there are some medications where it is genuinely dangerous to take
Right.
to drink alcohol whilst you're taking it. Like it will kill you. So they're kind of stronger on those ones, but the ones where it just makes the medication less effective or not effective at all, they don't seem to be too strong on the warnings. And I think that's a message that we really need to get out there to people.
Well, I think with experience, like I know for myself, like there was a point where I had hit kind of a depression and I was on antidepressants. And what I felt though, and when you brought this up, it triggered the thought of going, so the reason I decided to stop taking antidepressants was because I didn't feel anything unless it was anger, kind of, or I felt flat. I didn't feel that love towards my wife, towards my daughter that I felt like I should feel. I didn't feel as empathetic. And so, if there's other people out there taking these antidepressants and they feel so flat, you're probably reaching for the bottle to feel unflat. But then you're undoing everything that the medicine is supposed to be taking care of. And maybe it took care of something, but I didn't feel like that juice was worth the squeeze, not being able to feel and my emotions feeling flat because I'm normally a very kind, caring, compassionate, empathetic person. And so it was kind of in conjunction that I had just stopped it all at once and was like, the alcohol is not doing me any good. And even if I stop the antidepressants, the alcohol still needs to stop. Because I know it's not contributing to my need for the antidepressants, but that is a very interesting kind of connection that was made just then for me.
It's not uncommon. I mean, I've read a few studies that have talked about the number of people that stop drinking and their depression clears up. Sometimes lifestyle changes are far more effective than taking a pill. It's just your doctor's usually pretty busy and he's got about 6 minutes with you, and
Right.
therefore he's going to prescribe you a pill rather than attempt to make some sort of lifestyle change.
Well, because, the other thing with lifestyle changes, I used to run two ambulatory clinics, two primary care clinics, and good doctors can see you in 15 minutes, but that's like a fast, very productive doctor, and they're still getting behind. But kind of like you said, it's one of these things where you could go in for a 15-minute visit. You could possibly, by the end of your visit, have something you can swallow. Things might get better in a couple of weeks. With a lifestyle change, or if you want to call it self-improvement, or anytime you quit drinking or anything like that, that self-work, it requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of maintenance. It requires a lot of upkeep. But it's not just that, is just like you would go back to a doctor and see if the medication's working. I think a lot of people, maybe they lack a support system and accountability for that self-work. And then it can become too overwhelming just for yourself to hold yourself accountable.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And we talk a lot about recovery capital. And I think it's one of the things that a lot of people miss when they talk about getting sober. They say, oh, it was easy to get sober. And honestly, I found it easy to stop drinking. But you could kind of turn around and say, well, of course you did, Duncan. You had a supportive wife, you have a family around you, you have a good friendship circle, you had a job. I mean, technically, I didn't like the job, but it did pay the bills. I
Right.
was also very involved in my community. So I had that sense of meaning and purpose. I had a lot going for me. I had a lot of that capital that I was able to build on. And I think best cruel optimism to say, well, just do what I did and you'll get the results that I got. And that is true if you're me, but you're not, thank God.
Why are we talking about an alcohol epidemic? Why? I've noticed, especially over my years and, the bouts of kind of sobriety and starting back up and whatnot, I feel like the world's definitely at some sort of impasse or tipping point with people are starting to notice that alcohol is kind of like cigarettes back in the day, where used to you had ashtrays in the airplanes, and people are starting kind of like that to notice maybe it's not as safe or as fun or as whatever it is that we were led to believe. that we accept it so easily. And people are turning to other things, but I think you're actually seeing a little more of a sobriety type movement, if you will.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and yeah, I think it's the foamy bit of a breaking wave. I think that's where we're at the moment. And you look, when alcohol companies start really putting money into alcohol-free versions of their product, you know that things are genuinely changing. I mean, saying that, there is an awful long way to go. There's a lot that we have to do. I think the narrative, the conversation around alcohol is very different to the conversation around smoking, and that's something that we need to change. One thing that does fill me with optimism is if you look at when the connection between smoking and lung cancer was definitively proven, it was around the 50s. The connection between alcohol and cancer was proven around the 80s. So we're probably about 30 years behind where we are with smoking. So, that makes me feel quite optimistic because in the last 30 years, a lot has changed around smoking. And I think some of the lessons that we have learned from the tobacco world, I think we really need to apply to alcohol. So things like the international framework for the control of tobacco, that's been pretty useful, been very widely signed, although I don't think America is a full signatory. Something about calling them Marlboro Lights would not being allowed to call them Marlboro Lights. I think that would violate your right to free speech. I think that's why you didn't sign it. But basically, everybody else did, and it's been very effective. And also, I think putting those health warnings on the packets, they're not actually very effective at stopping people from smoking. Because smokers generally look at them and it makes them afraid. And then what do smokers do when they're afraid?
Smoke.
Right, exactly, they smoke. So it doesn't actually stop smokers smoking. It might well even do the opposite. But what it does very crucially is it shows us that cigarettes are not like the other products in the supermarket. And I think a lot of people they go to the shop and they go, I'll get some oranges, I'll get some crisps, I'll get some shower gel, I'll get a 6 pack of beer. And they don't see any difference between alcohol and the rest of their shopping. And I think that's a really important distinction that we need to make. And I think that's the health warnings are kind of the first step on that, to help people realize that alcohol is not an ordinary commodity.
Yeah, I find it interesting that we're arriving at this place. What are your thoughts on why? Why now? Why has it become such a focal point? What, and I read into your bio, and when looking at questions to ask you, there was one that was, why is alcohol a business problem? Is productivity in business becoming, getting into it? Is that why we're seeing it? Or kind of what's your opinion on why is it
So
important now?
yeah, I think a couple of really key changes in the business world have hastened this, and some of it, as a result of lockdown. I think companies now are much more focused on their employee well-being for the simple reason that more productive employees, which is like obviously going to affect the bottom line, but actually well-being is now becoming quite an important point in terms of recruitment. So a lot of people now, when they look at jobs, they're looking at the company and they're looking at their record of employee well-being. So in terms of, if you want to attract the top talent, that's now something that is a bit of a given. You have to do it. So there's recruitment, there's retention, there's productivity, there's burnout, there's stress, all of these factors that businesses are getting very hot on. I'd love it if they were getting hot on it from a moral standpoint, but of course they're not. It's simple, it's simply the bottom line. And that's good that conversation is happening. So that's definitely part of it. But I think also the fact that we've just become a lot more open about mental health, I think that's really helped the conversation, because there used to be a lot of stigma around depression.
Right.
But here we go, two butch, macho, manly guys talking about depression. No, no problem there anymore. And I think that all we really need to do is join the dots. What we need to do is figure out that actually alcohol is a mental health issue. In fact, there are a number of mental health conditions that make you more likely to suffer from problems with alcohol. And as we've already discussed, alcohol causes problems for your mental health. So it can give you mental health conditions. And incidentally, substance misuse, look it up in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Health. That's where you'll find it. It is a mental health problem, although we don't tend to talk about it in that terms very often. So that's the first dot we've got to join up. The second dot we've got to join up is, like, alcohol is so fundamental to your well-being. The amount you drink really does have a huge impact on your well-being. And look, I love yoga, right? I love yoga, do it most days, but honestly, it's not going to help you if you're drinking 3 or 4 glasses of wine with dinner. Even if you're drinking a couple of glasses of wine with dinner, even if it's only 3 or 4 times a week, still yoga is going to be far less effective than getting a handle on your drinking. So we need to also realize that the first step in well-being should be looking at those issues around drinking and vaping and taking drugs and so on. And once you've dealt with that, then you can start thinking about things like diet and exercise and sleep and hydration, which are all super important. But actually, alcohol is going to ruin your chances with most of those things. So yeah, I think the change in the way that we start to talk about things like well-being and mental health, brilliant. We just now need to join up the dots and say, alcohol is a massive part of both of those areas.
You think that coming out of the pandemic possibly turbocharged a more alcohol-free movement, in that so many people were locked down during the pandemic and turned to alcohol? And so when we left the pandemic, we're now openly more so discussing mental health. And since, like you were just discussing, that alcohol is a mental health problem, that perhaps the same way that, mental health was kind of propelled out of the pandemic, maybe sobriety and turning away from alcohol come from the pandemic, because so many people turned to alcohol during the pandemic.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, as you kind of alluded to, it was a bit of a double-edged sword, wasn't it? It struck me as very amusing that all of these people that said they didn't have time to exercise all of a sudden had a lot of time to exercise, but ate a lot of biscuits instead. It's quite, the research is quite clear. Alcohol consumption went up massively during the pandemic. Like 1.5 million more problem drinkers just in the UK alone. So like the numbers are big and scary. And that means that a lot of people got trapped a bit further. And some of them have come out. But I think actually a lot of people did embrace it as an opportunity to look at their life and see what they wanted from life and reconsider things. And I think it would be wrong to say everybody got less healthy during the pandemic. In the same way, it'd be wrong to say everybody got more healthy. But people did make their choice, and some of them, they made that choice. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it also had a lot of an effect on drinking. So one of the things that really exacerbates drinking, along with most mental health issues, is isolation. And of course, it contributed to that, didn't it? So I think that kind of push for well-being and that discussion of mental health, that absolutely was turbocharged by the pandemic. I mean, I think it was coming anyway,
Right.
but I think definitely sped us up. Somebody said we probably did about 10 years in that kind of like 1.5 year period. And certainly, I mean, I've had a Zoom account since 2017 because I think I'm cool. But nobody was using it in 2019, were they? It was just like I was having so much difficulties getting people to be interviewed on it. And now, like, here we are.
It's
so
funny.
Yeah, it's changed a lot of stuff, hasn't it?
I think it's funny that, like you said, people don't associate the difference in their shopping choices. Well, one of the other problems that contributed was that, guess what? Grocery stores had to be open. People still had to eat during lockdown, and therefore they could go in and buy alcohol. But it does make me question. I cannot remember if alcohol stores, not grocery stores, but package stores, were actually considered, what do you call it, necessary services, or and if they were open. And I can't put it in my mind if they were, but I think they were. And you couldn't go to gyms, but you could
I
go and buy
can't really
alcohol.
I can't really help you on that one because we don't have shops that only sell alcohol anymore. I mean, there are one or two, but
Mhm.
in general, alcohol is so widely available in supermarkets and convenience stores that there is almost no need for, stores that only sell alcohol. And that is one of the big problems, and one of the if I win the upcoming presidential election, one of the first things I'm going to do is change the availability of alcohol, because the science on that, the studies that have been done, are pretty robust. If you decrease the amount of availability, alcohol consumption goes down. And if you increase the amount of availability, alcohol consumption goes up. And over the last, 20 years, we have done nothing but increase the availability of alcohol, to the point that now you don't even have to talk to anybody to buy it. You can just press a button on an app and somebody will bring it round for you.
Yeah, so I grew up in a dry county in a small town, and it hadn't been that long. They just started allowing beer and wine in supermarkets and convenience stores. But if you want liquor, like whiskey, you still have to go across county lines to a liquor store. So it's definitely different and it's changed. And I used to think it was kind of weird in a way growing up, but I felt like, yes, you had to drive further to get it and you had to travel across county lines, used to when I was growing up, to even just get beer. But I always thought that it meant people would just go and get more, or they were sneaking around to drink it, or they were kind of stockpiling because it was this commodity and it required a long trip. And so I was always kind of curious if the availability versus how much it contributed, how many drunk driving accidents and stuff there were. I'd be interested to kind of go back and look at my town during those time periods and go, hey, what were things like when you had to go through different counties to get it? And what is it like now? Is there an increase and a decrease? But I definitely think I want to check that out. So that was an interesting point. But how did you become obsessed with portrayal of alcohol in streaming services?
But just basically because I watch too much TV.
Hey, after you finish listening to this amazing podcast, be sure to give it a 5-star rating. Then go check out the other podcasts in the Podcast Connection Network, including my own, Magic and Metamorphosis. Check us all out. The link will be in the episode's description.
No, so it all really started with Bridgerton on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen
My
that one.
wife's watching it now.
Oh yeah. Okay, so the third series has just come out. So I'm a hardcore Bridgerton fan. Basically, my wife made me watch it. And I watched the first series and I was absolutely amazed by it, because it's like it was almost regular as clockwork. They would have cigarettes featured in every episode, twice an episode, sort of after 10 to 20 minutes and after 30 to 40 minutes. And you could set your watch by it. It was so regular. So I started talking about it when I was helping people to stop smoking. And I was talking about it primarily because loads of people watched it, but also because it bangs this drum that Hollywood has been banging for years and years and years: glamorous women smoking. And then the second series came out and I was looking forward to it. My wife was like, "Oh, I didn't know you were really keen to watch it." "Oh yeah, absolutely, definitely want to watch it." But there was less smoking in it. And I was like, "Oh, that's a bit weird, isn't it?" There was more drinking in it though. I kind of noticed that. And then an article from the British Medical Journal came to my attention, which they did a coding study on Netflix about smoking, and they found that 74% of Netflix shows had smoking in them. Those are the Netflix originals branded at 15 and 18. And unsurprisingly, Netflix got into some trouble for this, and they decided they publicly committed to reduce the amount of smoking in their shows. And it coincided with the second series of Bridgerton. And I thought to myself, oh, you have reduced the smoking, but you've increased the drinking. So I started then paying attention, and I noticed drinking more and more. So I thought, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to, like, in the name of science, I'm going to watch some TV. So I did a coding study myself, and what I found was 86.5% of Netflix shows have got alcohol in them.
Wow.
Those, again, Netflix originals branded 15 and 18. And so that's kind of like alarming enough that it's, it's like almost all of them, 86.5%. It's a huge amount. But actually the time that alcohol gets featured in was what really surprised me. So the average time for alcohol to be featured is just under 10 minutes. Now, that probably doesn't surprise most people, but if you actually look at product placement, the optimum time for product placement is about 10 minutes in, because people have settled, they've got into the show, but they haven't got so distracted in the show that they won't notice it. So if you were going to put product placement in a drama, you would go for about 10 minutes. And that is typically where Netflix will put alcohol into their shows. And yeah, it sort of all went downhill from there. And I've done some other studies. We're working on one at the moment. We're looking at Griselda. Did you watch that?
I did not. My wife, she's a big
Oh,
fan
really?
of. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Because that's quite different to Bridgerton. Griselda and The Gentleman and Painkillers are the ones that we're looking at in particular, because Griselda is ostensibly about a cocaine dealer.
Right.
The Gentleman is ostensibly about marijuana farming, and Painkiller is also effectively about opioids. And when I've watched Painkiller, I noticed that there was, yes, there's depictions of people taking oxy in it, but actually there's a lot of drinking. So I thought I'm going to work it out. I'm going to see which wins. And there are more depictions of people drinking alcohol in Painkiller. Likewise with Griselda, we haven't finished it yet, but there's like this hierarchy. There's a lot of smoking in Griselda. There's a lot of drinking in Griselda, but there's a lot of cocaine in it. And it's sort of odd that it's supposedly about cocaine, yet it features a whole lot more alcohol. And it actually, you don't tell me it's just for dramatic reasons, because if it was just for dramatic reasons, you wouldn't be quite so keen to show me the label of the beer bottle. And there's this amazing scene where they shoot it from various different angles, and it's this magic beer bottle where the label is always facing the camera. No matter which angle the camera is shooting from, the label is always facing the camera.
That is so wild to think about. But as you were discussing it, it kind of gave me this thought of almost like true addictions. They go backwards. Yeah, they start at the cocaine, then maybe they go to the alcohol, and then at the end they're just smoking cigarettes in a meeting, talking about it. But I find it interesting that, kind of like you said, it's a movie. You would think that if Griselda is a movie about cocaine or a cocaine queenpin, because it's a movie and it's entertainment, there should be no problem showing more cocaine, but yet they show more, I guess what we would consider legal and acceptable is kind of where my thought process was running when you were discussing it, is maybe that we're so trained and we consider it so acceptable that most people wouldn't even notice unless they took a conscious look like yourself.
And that's why it's such effective advertising, because it's subconscious and it's, it gets right down into those deep, deep bits of your brain. And like they start them young, don't they? I mean, like,
Yeah.
I watched a lot of James Bond when I was a kid.
Mhm.
So why, what did I learn from that? One, you really need to get a white dinner jacket, like a white tuxedo. That is an absolute must have. If you're going to have a gun, it's got to be a Walther PPK. And if you're going to drink, the girls are going to love you. So, that is absolutely what we take from it. And James Bond has advertised an awful lot of things, but he's done more than his fair share of advertising various types of alcohol. I believe Heineken paid about 45 million US dollars to be in one of the Daniel Craig Bond films. So
that's where it goes. It always goes back to money.
Yeah, absolutely. And alcohol companies, they do have quite a lot of it, and there aren't that many of them. So I know there are lots of brands out there, but most of those brands are owned by one of 10 big companies worldwide.
So let's talk about your book, Real Men Quit. Give us a little snippet of that, what it's about, why you decided to write it, and where people can find it.
So I love a lot of, I read a lot, and I love a lot of the books about stopping drinking. There are some great ones out there, but what I found was they all kind of resonate with me now. Once I
Hmm.
stopped drinking, they made a lot of sense. But when I was actually drinking, a lot of them were written by women, and a lot of the examples that they used are not necessarily something that would resonate with me. So if you're talking about drinking white wine before you pick the kids up from school, that
Right.
didn't really make much sense to me when I was drinking. So that would have put me off. And then a lot of the ones written by guys tend to be a little bit dry and a little bit sciencey. They're almost kind of like written in this default mode where we all, what is the default? Oh, it's a white male. So they just think by writing they're going to appeal to white men. But actually, we're not just the default. We're not just bland facsimiles of human. We are people with our interests. That's what we should be catering to. And look, I mean, men have a problem with drinking, right?
Yes.
For every 4 alcoholic beverages sold worldwide, a man is going to drink 3 of them. The average man drinks 19.6 liters of pure alcohol a year, which translates to about 3.5 bottles of wine a week, which is way too much. So we have more of a problem, and we don't ask for help. But I'm kind of hoping that maybe, we'll go on Amazon or Audible and get a copy of Real Men Quit. And so, yeah, basically, I wrote it to try and appeal to men. So there's lots of sport in there. There's lots of Star Wars, Terminator, bit of James Bond, and a lot of bad jokes as well. So it's designed for men.
Oh, that's awesome. I don't think I've ever seen one, but kind of now that you bring it to my attention, I've listened to several sobriety podcasts, but I definitely think it's interesting, maybe correlating maybe how a woman would speak about stopping drinking versus a man, especially when we have more of the problem. But
Yeah, yeah.
that brings me kind of to that question is why isn't stopping drinking an area not dominated by men? And who is dominating that? Who's taking the forefront, the lead on quitting drinking?
Yeah, so if you look in the sobriety space, there are a whole lot more women talking about being sober and stopping drinking. And look, I mean, they're doing an excellent job. I love a lot of their work. I'm a huge fan of many of the women that are out there. Annie Grace, probably the most famous of all of them, This Naked Mind. I mean, she's great. I love her and everything. But yeah, I think there is a real need for men to talk about drinking because we drink in a different way. And I mean, it is an enormously complicated subject, but in essence, a lot of guys drink because they want to prove that they're a man. And what better way to prove that you're a real tough guy than pouring a bunch of poison down your throat? If you can handle this, you can handle anything. And yeah, so it's so tied up with masculinity and strength that I think we need to discuss it in a very male
It's
way.
like a
And
rite of passage.
exactly. And I think also the reasons that men tend to drink are often quite different from the reasons women tend to drink. So somebody summed it up quite nicely recently, saying, well, men drink to stop, but women drink to keep going. And it's like, well, that is, of course, a generalization, but I think there are differences, and we need to sort of be honest about that, and we need to cater to everybody. And I think it runs to a deeper point that over the last 120 years, women have organized to get issues onto the political agenda to deal with problems that affect women. And they've been very effective at it. And I'm not here to suggest that all of those problems have been solved and the world is rosy, but they are at least doing something about it and doing a decent job of it. And what have men been doing for the last
Drinking.
120 years? Well, we stopped wearing hats. Now, that's a little bit facetious. And I know there is change, but I don't think we're organizing ourselves enough. I don't think we're getting together to get the distinctly male problems onto the agenda, like drinking alcohol, like suicide, like the prison population, like a lot of specifically male issues that we're just kind of like not really addressing. So come on, guys, it's time to get organized.
Yeah, I recently interviewed a gentleman on men's groups and kind of what he had said was very similar to what you were saying in terms of because women, they had a lot less rights. They couldn't vote. There was many things. Their positions were different in the household as perceived. Therefore, they kind of came together and they've put all these issues forward, and now they're vice presidents and all kinds of stuff and CEOs, and rightfully so. But men, we're behind because we didn't necessarily maybe see a need or a reason to organize. And now we're kind of behind in terms of, like you said, men getting together and talking about real issues. And that was kind of what he had alluded to, the importance of men's groups, and being accountable, calling other men forward and offering them help when they need it. But most importantly, just connecting with other men.
Yeah, you see, the thing is, I don't think it's really about gender or sex or even race or sexual identity, or all of these issues. They like we're all human beings, and there are an awful lot of people who are suffering, and we kind of need to get together to solve all of the problems. And I think the problem is you can sometimes end up getting a bit kind of like, oh well, there's too much to do, isn't there? So I'll just watch some sport and have a beer. But you've got to kind of like, you've got to pick something, guys. You find something you care about, and then do a little bit. You don't even have to do a lot. You write to your congressman, write to your member of parliament, depending on where you're living. Sign a petition, or just stop giving the alcohol companies money. That'd make a difference.
I see a second book in the background over there. Get Over Indulgence. What's that one about?
Yeah, so that was my first book. That's my kind of journey. So that's the path I took from eating badly, drinking, smoking, generally just being a heart attack waiting to happen, to happiness and enjoyment and peace and calm and having a wonderful family and being in a generally a much better place. I don't want to put people off by saying you could learn something by reading it. There is a little bit of learning in there, but mostly it's just a story. It's kind of like it's short as well. It's really, really short. People regularly tell me they read it in an afternoon, which I think is the greatest compliment I ever get. So it's just a little bit of kind of like helping you realize that change is possible, and a few ideas about how you might go about doing that.
What keeps you so enthusiastic and passionate about this subject? Because that's kind of one thing I noticed that certainly comes across. And
I think that once you have seen it, you can't unsee it. And for me, it was when I smelt it. So I was working with somebody who very, very smart, 2 advanced degrees, only didn't finish their PhD because they got headhunted. So like we're talking properly smart. Went to the best university, not in the country, on the continent. That's the way she puts it. So really, really smart individual, but she got to the point where, alcohol had taken pretty much everything from her. Job, family, hope, and she got to the point where she just wasn't able to look after herself. And I was trying to help her out and trying to get her the help that she needed, and just going and visiting her in her flat. It was awful. And that smell, it always stays in your nostrils. And for me, that is the smell of despair and the harm and the pain and the suffering that gets caused by alcohol. And you can't unsee that. You can't forget it. And once you've seen it, I certainly feel compelled to do something about it. So yeah, that's why I'm so passionate and enthusiastic, which is kind of weird, isn't it? That's something that I heard the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu discussing, and you can't name drop any bigger than that, can you? They were saying that like suffering is a teacher. Your pain will give you those lessons, and my own suffering, but the suffering of the people around me, that is what has taught me, and that motivates me, and that's why I get out of bed in the morning. And I think put in the situations that I've been in, you couldn't help but be passionate about it.
I love that you're so passionate about it, because I definitely think the world needs more people with that kind of passion about these subjects. And I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't come across them all yet. But I'm sure in my time I will.
I'll send a few people your way. Don't worry. I know a few. But do you know what? I know a lot of very successful people who've got sober, and they don't normally talk about it that much. And it sort of like does get on my nerves a little bit So Anthony Hopkins, great actor,
Hmm.
great guy. He's been sober for like 48 years or something like that. It's ridiculous. He's been sober longer than I've been alive.
I know. I turned
Yeah,
48 this month. I'm like, wow, that's
there you
bananas.
go. There you go. You are Anthony Hopkins sober baby.
That is so
Uh,
crazy.
Yeah. And like he's a great guy. And he has talked about it, but it's not like most people know that Anthony Hopkins doesn't drink. In fact, what has Anthony Hopkins' unwitting contribution to the debate been? A nice bottle of Chianti and some fava beans. So he's probably done more for advertising alcohol than he has for advertising sobriety. And I'm not blaming him or anything, but I just think, sometimes we need to be a bit more vocal about it. We need to sort of say, look, actually my success comes from various places. One of those is that I've made the right choices about supporting my body and my mind, and often that includes not drinking.
So as we wrap this up, where can people find you?
Real Men Quit is on Amazon. It's pretty easy. I'm sure you've heard of Amazon. Just write Real Men and Quit, which are all very short words, so you'll be absolutely fine. And you'll find that. But if your listeners would like to grab a copy of Get Over Indulgence as a little gift to them, I would love to offer them the PDF or the Kindle version. Or if you can stand listening to me for 3 hours and 45 minutes, you can download the audio as well. So just put getover.uk, that's getover.uk into the internet. And that will take you to a bit on my website where you can download Get Over Indulgence. And obviously that's a bit of my website. So from there you can find out a little bit more about what I do. I put a lot of content out there. I'm pretty busy on the socials. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook, do. If you've got any questions, just fire them away. I hope it comes across, but I talk about this stuff all day long.
Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. So did you use any particular method to stop drinking, or was it,
I
well,
think, well, whenever I was listening to a particular podcast called that Stop Drinking Podcast by Barty Orez, when I was able to put together for me, it just kind of clicked when he described it as your dopamine. When you drink alcohol, you're kind of redlining like in your RPMs. And, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so now you're going below baseline. And then you're depressed for days trying to get back up to baseline. But guess what? We can get right back up to red line if we just take a couple shots of Jameson. Realizing you're in that pattern and going, okay, 3 or 4 days to kind of maybe come back up to a baseline. And then let's start doing a few things, whether it's tightening up nutrition, going for a little walk to get a little dopamine and to avoid that red line. And let's see what baseline's like. And then let's start working on boosting that dopamine and raising that baseline through journaling, through meditation, through exercise, through connection with other people. For me, it's kind of the podcast. And so, because it was not long after I stopped drinking that I started the podcast. It's been a little bit of all of it, but I think making that connection that, minus all the stuff it does to your body, this is what it's doing to your brain. And this is why your brain is going in circles. This is why you feel like you're on a merry-go-round and you're about to jump off and eat shit, you know? And you just got to do it. You just got to make the leap, dust off, and walk it off, and it will get better. But you have to give yourself that chance. And it took me making that mental picture in the brain of this is what it's doing every time you do it. And this is why you're moody and why you don't feel great mentally, because it's okay to, as you age, you feel different physically. You feel the aches and pains of 47 years of life, but there's a difference when your mental space feels clear. And for me, it was all about the mental. And that's kind of how I stopped.
No, that's grand. Incidentally, that's called the opponent process theory. And I don't know why it's not more widely known. Well, I mean, I know why no one's heard of the opponent process theory. It's got an awful name, but that kind of like redlining thing. And it's so obvious, isn't it? You do not get something for nothing in this world. If it goes up, it's
It must
going to
go
go
down.
down. That's not my opinion. It's literally one of the laws of physics.
Physics. And I took physics. And so, having a master's degree and being educated, first I was like, oh, maybe this is why this explanation is clicking. But there's other factors. There's timing. There's your attitude towards it. You're ready. There was those last drinks I had on my birthday, and going an hour and a half in, I'm like, I'm already starting to feel depressed. And these two drinks didn't even do anything for me. But I'm getting the depression with none of the benefit. And so when you start clicking all those things together, everything just lined up and made it easier. But I can definitely tell you, diving back into that podcast, similar podcast, that Sober Guide podcast is a great one. But listening to other people's journeys, their struggles, and under correlating those struggles with your own, and understanding that if you don't get out, then you're going to either continue to struggle, or you're going to put yourself in a situation that's going to land you with a felony and jail on probation or something like that. And then you're going to be forced to quit against your will. And so I think for me, it lined up, and I'm glad it did. And, and that's kind of why I'm enthusiastic about sharing it as well, because maybe this conversation, maybe this episode, maybe today is your day that it lines up for you and it clicks for you. And however you get it, whatever method you use, to me is less important than you get it. And it lines up.
No,
And
absolutely. I mean, look, I, like many people at one point, was a little bit guilty of saying there is the best method for stopping drinking. I get some people get very, very dogmatic about it, and they say the only way to do it. And it's like, well, what you mean is the way that was effective for you. And I'll give you a pass because it probably saved your life. So why would you not be passionate about something that saved your life? But I think that's another one of my obsessions, that we need to be a bit more open and say, look, there are different methods out there. You can go to a group program. There's actually lots of different group programs out there. AA just happen to have an amazing PR machine. So you can go to a group program. You can do it with a therapist. You can do cognitive realignment, either as an online program or with a coach or something like that. Or, you know what? About 45% of people that stop drinking without any formal support at all. You do not need to go to rehab. Some people do. Some people genuinely do. Some people genuinely really need to have medically supervised withdrawals. But a lot of people get sober without any sort of formal support, just by listening to podcasts, reading books, like Real Men Quit.
this is true. Very true. That's how I credit podcast therapy as very, very beneficial to me. But, I think
Yep.
anytime you can make those connections and you can see how your path is similar to someone else's, and that you're not alone, you're not crazy, and that we all are unique to a degree, but this problem isn't unique to you. And why not enlist the support of passionate people who are enthusiastic about it and whose life's mission is to help people in these situations? And you can go straight to the source, even if it's just for accountability, because make no mistake about it, like anything else, you yourself have to be committed and do the work. And
Yeah.
it is
And
work.
that is the annoying part of it.
But I found that the work is actually the most beneficial part as well. Taking that look inside and learning to describe what it is you really want and how you really feel, and put that into words. And a lot of people can't do that. They just think, I want happiness, or I want this amount of money, or they don't even know why they want it. They think it's the means to an end. But I would say, in my walk with quitting drinking and taking that look inside, being able to put words to those things and sit with discomfort has been almost more beneficial than the quitting drinking by itself, because
No, I think
ultimately that's a problem within yourself,
you
is why you're drinking.
you've touched on a couple of very interesting and important points. I think that ability to handle emotions, that emotional intelligence, coupled with self-awareness, that's so important, and it's something that comes up again and again in the research that we do. And it's just, yeah, it's a great skill for recovery, but you know what, it's a pretty good skill for life.
Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of the whole point, is, I've learned more about my life than I have anything else. But it was the sobriety and the quitting drinking was the first step. And the other parts were the therapy. And I didn't journal for 4 or 5 days. And because I was on vacation and just a little lackadaisical, and I probably should have been journaling more. But when I went back to the journal yesterday, I was like, man, I can feel this. And so, any therapy, any self-work you do, just realize whether it's nutrition, exercise, self-improvement through journaling, whatever it is you're doing, it takes consistency.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, that's the great thing, isn't it? When you get to the point where you can feel it, because the whole of the time that I was drinking, the thing that I get a lot of the time when I talk to people that were drinking, they were numb. They couldn't feel anything. And that's just like, yeah, how can I make my life better? I can't, I'm not in touch with my body or my life or my emotions or my feelings at all because I'm just numb the whole time.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you. I will definitely be checking out your books for sure, and I'll drop all that in the show notes. But
Thank you, man. It's been lovely talking to you, and I hope all of the listeners go out and give you a 5-star review on Apple or whatever their favorite platform is, so that you can continue, spreading the message and putting all that good work out into the world.
well, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Remember, go out and be the person that you want to meet.
Asteroid of fear.